across the board for all of us during these very difficult times as we do our best to cope with the pandemic. And engagement in this kind of activity, this is a kind of privilege to have time and energy and full tummies and rent paid and things like that to come and participate. So I want to say thank you. It's really meaningful to me to see so many people here. I'd also like to, before we get too far, I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging that we're on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Attawandarat, and the Anishinaabe, and also that this is the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and that we are part of the land that we stand on, work on, meet on, play and live on, is the treaty between the Lakes Purchase. And I know that we want to get rolling here, and we always need to be mindful of time. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to introduce our freshly elected leader of the Green Party of Canada, and a very strong showing in the Toronto Centre by-election. I've heard great things about our campaign team from that election. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce and join me in welcoming Annamie Paul.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Hi, Sean.
Yay!
Hi. It is so good to be with you this evening. I'm coming to you from Toronto, from the traditional territories of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat with much gratitude. It is so great to be with you, even virtually. It is always such a wonderful thing to see Sean, and who has very quickly become one of my most favorite people. And for me, especially at the end of a long day, being able to be with Greens is wonderful and incredibly energizing. And just it's really like a shot of vitamin C. So it is just wonderful to see all your happy, smiling faces in some cases. I know we all have reasons not to be at our happiest at this moment. So I mean, it's nice to see your faces in any case, whatever the expression. Oh, vitamin G, I like that. That's good. I might coin that. I might steal that one. So I just bring greetings from the trail. I know that Guelph members are among some of the most committed, engaged, passionate, thoughtful members that there are within the Green Party. I recognize many of the names that I see on the screen exactly because you were very involved during the leadership race. And so we all know where we've been. We all know what kind of year we've had. I find that when I'm doing AGM events, and I definitely am still doing them, I really very, very much want to stay connected with our members. I accept all invitations to participate in AGMs and other events like that Greens are having across the country. And so I can already bring greetings to you from our Greens in Northern Ontario, Greens out in West Vancouver, Sea to Sky, our Halifax Greens. Where else have I spoken with Greens recently? Our Victoria Greens, Victoria BC Greens, and a number of other Greens. I do a couple of events, at least a couple every week. And so most Greens want to hear about how it's going. How have the first 60 days or so been? And they've been extraordinary. They've been extraordinary. Part of the reason is thanks to Sean. Sean was our campaign manager for our Toronto by-election. And I really want you to know, in Ontario in particular, that I believe that we are competitive all over the place now, not just federally, but also provincially, because there's a new feeling out there. There's a new feeling out there. And we were lucky that we were able to really get a feel for it in a way that you only can when you have a by-election. So keep in mind, we went into this thing and the polls were predicting that we would emerge with about 6.5% to 7% of the vote. You know, these were the best predictions.
Have we lost Annamie?
It looks that way. Let's see
Hey,
if she'll
everyone.
come right back.
We'll try and get her back. In the meantime, the very first thing I'll do is remind you that as such an engaged group of Greens, we always have the opportunity to contribute. And if you go to guelphgreens.ca/donate, you could do that right now. And also, if you haven't had the chance to volunteer with all the great things that we're doing, you could also go to the Guelph Greens site and sign up to volunteer. And I've put both of those links in the chat for your convenience. But I also want to say a thank you. I recognize so many people on this call from amazing volunteering, and I have to believe that many of you have donated as well. So thank you to all of you. One of the most important phrases that Mike Schreiner taught me was about how important it is that we're able to connect with the community, and then we're able to give them a reason to trust us, to believe in us, so that they're going to share their talent, their time, and their treasure. And I'm so appreciative for your time tonight. Before we go on,
Hello?
what I might just say is that, oh, hello.
I'm so sorry. Our internet just cut out completely in our entire home. I have no idea. And this is Toronto, so that's that hasn't actually happened since the early days of the pandemic when there were actually rolling internet outages. I'm so sorry. And I was on a roll, and I actually kept talking for about a minute before I realized what happened.
Okay. I encourage people to donate and volunteer. So
Exactly.
we're good. I think you were talking about how competitive we are and what the
About how wonderful you are. Just how exactly.
No,
yeah.
That's what I was saying.
Oh, yeah. Oh, look, we've started something with the vitamin G there, Sean. I see it in the chat. So just to shorten it a little bit, because yes, I get quite excited thinking about it. Anyways, those were the predictions. Those were the betting odds days. I think within 24 hours of the race. Of voting, the voting day. That's what we were predicted. But we just kept having people stopping us on the street when we were doing main streeting, saying to us, and we didn't do any door knocking, just so you know. This was a real pandemic campaign. We did no door knocking. We had no physical office. We had 3 weeks to do the entire thing, because I also wasn't able to campaign before I won the race. The EDA was not allowed to also to use any resources while I was still a contestant. So we really only got started after October the 4th, after I was elected. Oh, thanks, Sean, for the statistics. Yes, that's pretty impressive. So that is what it looked like. It was very much an era campaign, literature drops, main streeting, wave streeting, but no physical office space, no door-to-door canvassing. And so, with that little time and, with the resources we had, we were able to go from 7% in 2019 to almost 33% in the by-election. And and we went from, we vaulted over the Conservatives and the Liberals. We'd finished 4th in 2019. And we came within 9 points of the Liberals. And just again, put that in context, just a year earlier, almost to the day, the Liberals had won that seat for the 27th year in a row, 27th year, consecutive year, and they had won that seat. in 2019 with a margin of about 37% between them and the nearest competitor, which was the NDP, who got about 22% of the vote. So people are ready. This was not about me. I was not, yes, I was the leader of the party, but I was not known. And when people stopped me, they didn't say that they were voting for me. They said they were voting for change. They said they were voting for a positive vision of the future. Our slogan was "Be Daring." They loved that. They had been sufficiently transformed. This moment has sufficiently transformed them that they were ready to do something they had never done before. You know, these weren't people returning to the fold. These were brand new green votes, most of these votes. And they were just ready. They were ready for positive change, and they really believed that we could deliver that. And so it leaves me feeling very much that we can be competitive all over the place in this province. I really believe that the pandemic has transformed not just society, but you know, also politics. I believe that it is the kind of, I had said during the leadership race, sometimes you have a big enough disruption that people are ready for something different. They're ready to diverge from their usual path. And so that's the moment that I believe we find ourselves in. And so, you know, our job between now and then, my job is to really keep that momentum going. I've done more media than one you ever imagine. You know, I think we're definitely approaching now about 200 interviews. You know, obviously, you know, those of you who follow any mainstream media will have seen lots of talk, lots of chat. You know, we get quoted a lot these days. We're really trying to maintain that mainstream media attention, which I know many of you asked about during the leadership race. I know many of you, you know, wanted to know how do we get the mainstream media interested? And we seem, at least for the moment, to have cracked that code. And so that is very good news as well. So we're going to keep doing that. Our messages at the moment are very much focused on, first and foremost, keeping people safe during this, what we hope is the final wave of the pandemic. We cannot forget that we are in a worse wave than the first one. We're at more risk than we were the first time around. We still do not have access to an effective treatment. And so we have to remember that getting through this and, you know, as safely as we can is very important. And so we're trying to work with all of the parties to make sure we keep our eye on the ball, which is getting harder and harder. You know, everyone is positioning for the next election, which we think will be in the spring. We're not sure, but, you know, that seems to be the way things are trending. We're trying to make sure people don't get lost in that. And the other thing, of course, that the other two things that we're talking about are completing our social safety net. Now that we have the possibility of emerging from the worst of this, we want to already plan for the future. We want to make sure that we don't end up in this situation in this way again. We know what we need to do. We need the political courage and leadership to do that. And our message is we will work with anyone that agrees with us on that. And if the other parties don't have the courage to do it, then people should send us in, because we're ready. We're ready to do that. And then the climate. This is going to be a big period for potentially for the climate. The government just released some legislation, which I've been quoted many times as saying that it's all just smoke and mirrors, and it really is. It's accountability legislation for a plan that doesn't exist, and it doesn't have any teeth to it. So we're working behind the scenes to make sure that it has as much, meat on the bone. Well, I guess I can't say that anymore. Substance as possible. We want to make sure that if we do have this kind of legislation, it actually means something. It actually helps us to get there. And if it isn't, then we're not going to vote for it. But we're working to try to get it turned from, again, a souffle into something with more substance. And then the government may be introducing their much anticipated climate plan within the next number of weeks, perhaps even as early as January. And this is the plan, the one that's supposed to increase our targets, the one that's supposed to lay out the vision for how we will do our part to keep us below 1.5 degrees average global warming. So that is obviously going to be a very big thing for us as well, and we'll be talking about that. I could say much more, but only to say to all of you, thank you so much for all that you have done, that you continue to do for the party. I'm here to work very, very hard for you. I hope that that you're pleased with our early results, and that you know that I will continue to work hard for you. And there are many others, of course, across the GPC staff that are also out there working very hard for you. I know that you've been through a lot. I know it's been a very trying year. I know that perhaps some of you may not want to hear that we may be in an election soon, but we may be. So I just encourage you all to rest up, to take strength from each other, and to get ready to give of yourselves, you know, so that we can really have a great showing perhaps in the next few months. And just know that all across the country, AGMs are happening, Greens are organizing, Greens are mobilizing. We have 15,000 more members now than we did even a few months ago. So we're a bigger party, and we're energized. And so, you know, you have support all over the country. And you're part of a big Green family that is really getting ramped up for the next election. So thank you. Désolé, en fait, je n'ai pas partagé mes remarques entre l'anglais et le français, mais juste pour dire que j'ai fait beaucoup d'entrevues en français aussi. En fait, nous avons fait à peu près 30% de nos entrevues en français. We've done about 30% of our interviews in French. Which has been great and unprecedented, and it's been very nice to make connections with the Francophonie in Canada. They've decided that my French is great, and I'll take it, even if I don't necessarily agree. And that also has been a really big boost for us as well in parts of the country that we're really looking to make inroads into. So I will stop there. I think I've gone over my time. But it's really just such a pleasure to be with all of you. Very warm greetings, and wishing you happy holidays.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure everyone will join me in saying thank you to Annamie, mille merci. And I want you all to know how incredibly hard Annamie works. I'll tell you one very...
Is it Sean's turn now to freeze? It's a rolling thing.
Yeah, Sean froze.
Very quick story of me booking.
I mean, I wanted to hear that story. Sean, you froze.
Hey, I'm back. So I just in terms of, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Excellent. Just to share with you how all of us need to dig deep during campaigns, and even outside of that, and sometimes it's really hard to keep on going. To know that your leader is working as hard as you, or probably harder, is for me something that's really powerful. And so let me share one quick story of a late night virtual call on the phone and on Zoom to do telephone recordings with Annamie that I had to fight for to get at like 9:30 p.m. And I could just see how tired she was. And we were doing retakes because her voice was giving out because she was doing so much media. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to let you know just how incredibly committed and hardworking Annamie is. We have one very quick question.
Sure.
We want to do that, and is what do you think of the idea of a one-time alliance? I assume they mean with the conservative, no, I mean the NDP party.
My son has this gesture. I don't know where he picked it up, and I'm not sure. I don't know if it's incredibly rude or not. This is hand gesture that's become quite popular with. He's 16. You know, it's sort of this hand gesture like this. And you know, my response to that, I will say that after the 2 months that I've been in this role, I can tell you that with the greatest of respect, because you know I have many friends and families. Family members who are NDP and sympathetic to them. And of course, we have many things that we share in common. We have some very fundamental differences. We just really do. Our approaches, I'll start with our approach to the climate. They diverge significantly. This climate accountability legislation that came out and the references to the climate in the fall economic statement, which was just presented a couple of days ago. We immediately were pointing out the flaws, and in the case of the accountability legislation, the fatal flaws in that legislation. The NDP has not mentioned the climate, not once. There's been no mention whatsoever about the climate or about that legislation. I mean, there has been no mention of it whatsoever. And so there are other areas. There are other areas of significant departure, I would say. I guess I would also mention, for what it's worth, they have made their minds up. It's almost a moot point because they don't mention me. They don't refer to me. It is clearly the policy not to mention Annamie Paul's name or the Green Party in any way, in any reference. When I pass Jugmeat in the hallways, when I'm up on the hill, I mean, he won't even look me in the eye. So I don't think that we have fertile ground for that. And I do believe that Greens, as I said, we have an independent voice that is extremely necessary. We have a different way of doing things. And I believe that every person in Canada, wherever they are, they deserve to have a strong Green option to vote for in the next election. And so that's what I'm focused on. The ultimate decision through the course of time will be with our membership. I cannot impose my view, but I will say that I do not see enough stuff there to create that kind of an arrangement out of. I will also note that it requires a constitutional amendment, but that's a technicality. But technicalities aside, I will give you one more example, Sean, of, because it's not just me. You should also know that there are people like my assistant, Victoria, who is a strong Hamilton Green. She had a bad reaction to some prescription medication. She went to the hospital and got her system flushed out of this medication just so that she could be available to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to come from Hamilton to Toronto to collect me so that we could drive at 6 a.m. to Ottawa to be there to do to do media and a press conference at I guess 10:30 before we went into lockup so that we could review the financial statements before it came out, and then write a press release, and then do more media and another press conference and an event at the end of the day, and then drive back to Toronto at 9 at night. And she arrived back at home at 2 o'clock in the morning, having been up for almost 24 hours to do that. So, we believe, and we'll keep working hard because
we believe when people ask how do we win and why do we have such good opportunity, my first answer always is that we care more, we work harder, we out hustle everyone else. Thank you so much, Annamie. If everyone could please join me in thanking Annamie for spending her time and her thoughts with us this evening. Up next is Mike Schreiner. But right before we do that, I just want to say that I am we are such our time together is so important. I also want to really make a special acknowledgement of the diversity on this call, in part because diversity is something that we've, as a party, has struggled with, and we're actively working very hard to do better on that. So a special thank you and acknowledgement of people who are Black, Indigenous, identifies people of color, and a diversity of gender and sexual orientations. And I'm really pleased to see some really wonderful diversity on this call tonight. All right, next up is leader of the Green Party of Ontario, first elected Green MPP in the history of Canada. Feel like he had a really great campaign team as well. I'd like to introduce Mike Schreiner, and just between you and me, Mike, I'm going to give you 5 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Sean. And Annamie, thank you for joining us tonight. And my wife, Sandy, is joining us. She said only to hear what Annamie has to say. She's tired of listening to me talk. And I also want to thank you all for the wonderful land acknowledgements. And I had an experience at Queen's Park today that just reminded me of how far we have to go on reconciliation. I've worked really hard on some amendments around the province's regulations around bottled water. As you know, they're requiring host municipalities to say yes to new water bottling permits. And I put forward, I thought, were very reasonable amendments to include First Nations. I worked very closely with 6 Nations on this amendment. I also worked with the city of Guelph to include affected municipalities, because obviously, you know, there's a lot of water bottling wells that don't reside in Guelph but affect Guelph. And the Conservative government voted them all down today. And so it was a real disappointing moment for me, not only for what I think the city of Guelph lost, but I think more importantly was the lack of recognition of this government that Indigenous nations are nations. And if you're going to grant rights to the 3rd tier of government in this province and not grant the same rights to an adjacent nation, is just wrong. And so I just want us to keep pushing for a real and true reconciliation. And unfortunately, today was one of those days where I thought, wow, we have so far to go. So I want to thank all the Guelph Greens for the amazing work you're doing. I know this has been a challenging year, but 2,300 care calls to people in Guelph, amazing. On top of that, all the calls that Guelph Greens made for Annamie's by-election campaign, you all rock. And I know that COVID-19 has been tough on people, and it sucks that we're all physically distanced. But what has shown me is that we're still maintaining the social solidarity of our Green family. And so I want to thank everyone who volunteered to reach out and just let people know in our community that you care. And I just also want to say that we may only have one MPP at Queen's Park. And Sean, I was the first MPP in Ontario, not Canada, by the way. But anyway, we are making a difference. So it's hard to believe there was a time before COVID, but last year at this time, we passed the first green bill in Ontario's history, making life easier for electric vehicle drivers. I want to thank all of you for the amazing campaign we ran in the spring to get community gardens declared an essential service, because I think growing local food is an essential service, and we pushed the government on that. I played an instrumental role in getting all the parties to work together. And I can tell you this was very hard to do, but getting all 4 parties to work together to grant unanimous consent to bring in a commercial eviction ban to help protect small businesses and keep them alive over the summer. I think we've played a huge role in holding the government accountable this fall on a lack of preparedness for their wave 2 COVID plan. But at the same time, we've also been putting forward, I think, some bold and visionary solutions around building a green and caring Ontario as we come out of this pandemic. And I really encourage everyone to go to gpo.ca and check out our 10 principles we've outlined for a green and caring Ontario. And there's something I want to ask all of you tonight that is really important. Over the last few months, under the cover of COVID, the Ford government has engaged in a systematic attack on a lot of the environmental protections that really protect the places we love. Everything from gutting the Endangered Species Act to gutting the Environmental Assessment Act. And right now they're in the process of gutting the Conservation Authorities Act, which has protected us from water. And being a city that has 2 rivers, being in the Grand River watershed, we've seen so much flooding, particularly in places like Cambridge, where I did a news conference on this on Sunday it was. I'm losing track of my days. I first raised this at Queen's Park 2 weeks ago. Nobody else was talking about it. And since then, oh my gosh, 40, 50 municipalities have passed resolutions. The Ontario Big City Mayors, I want to give a shout out to Cam Guthrie for his leadership on that, passed a resolution. Association of Municipalities of Ontario is representing 440 municipalities in the province have passed a resolution. 65 community organizations now are running ads calling on the Ford government to stop the attack on conservation authorities. And I'm asking everyone, if you can call regional MPPs, I'm thinking of conservatives like Mike Harris and Amy Fee in our region, and put pressure on them that this is such a short-sighted move. And we still have about 5 or 6 days that we can get this government to reverse course. I'm going to be doing a news conference at Queen's Park tomorrow. I've been hammering them in question period every day. I can tell they're vulnerable on this issue. And in the same way we stop them from opening the Greenbelt for development, we can stop them from decimating our conservation authorities. I know on our GPO website, we have some letters and petitions you can sign. And so let's really make a difference. And then, Sean, if you'll give me 30 seconds to make one final plug, is that we have to start getting ready for the federal election, which is likely in the spring. And we have to start ramping up and getting ready for the provincial election, which is only a year and a half away. And one of the most important things we can do right now to get ourselves ready is to take advantage of December being the best month for fundraising of the year, hands down. And we only have 2 more Decembers before the next provincial election, and possibly only 1 more December before the next federal election. And so if you, and I know this has been a tough year financially for a lot of people, but if you're able to donate, it would make a huge difference. And if you're able to encourage others to donate, December is by far the most important fundraising month of the year. And then I just want to close by saying that if you're unable to donate, and I totally get it with COVID, if you can volunteer to help us make calls, these care calls are so much fun to do, and they mean so much to people in our community, making that human personal connection. I can't tell you how many people have just said to me, it's like, wow, like you guys are just calling. You're not asking for money or votes or anything. You're just calling because you care. And I think that says so much about what we are as a party and what we mean to this community here in Guelph. And so if you can take some time to make some of those calls, it would really mean a lot to me. And I know it would mean a lot to people in our community. So thanks for all the great work everyone is doing. And Sean, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
And with that, I'm going to hand things over to my very good friend, Krista, who's not 100% ready for this. So I said her name early and loudly. So Krista's going to introduce the panel, and you're going to get more information about voting as that information is available. I'd like to thank you for your patience. I'm going to drop off. I hope to come back in a little while and say goodbye to everyone. But I'd like to say, everyone, thank you so much for a great night, especially our very patient panelists and our special guests. You guys are a huge part of why Guelph is such a great community, and particularly that we've had such success here with the Green Party. So I will hopefully be back in a little while. I just know how amazing this session is going to be. I'm disappointed to miss it. Over to you, Krista.
Thank you, Sean. And I'm just was wondering if we could pull the team from the green room. And Sean, before you disappear, thank you very much. Oh, he disappeared, for being here tonight. I was just texting to see if the green room folks can come out. Are you able to?
We are here. Yeah, we're here.
Oh, you're here. Okay. So I'd like to introduce Jody Green. And Jody, I think you're going to introduce the panel for us. Is that right?
That's correct, Krista.
Okay.
Awesome.
And if you want to take it from here, I know we are sort of keeping the pace up. Okay. And Vanessa, I wondered if you could introduce Jody before we get onto the panel. Just putting you on the spot.
I can introduce myself, Vanessa. It's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I don't think she has the cheat sheets in front of her there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I didn't either. Yeah. Go ahead.
First, I'd like to thank everybody. I think it's amazing. I see that there are like 90 participants on this call for this AGM. I am so thrilled. I'm the new CEO for West Nova. We're fairly newly active federal EDA in Nova Scotia, coming to you from Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we had 7 at our at our AGM, and I was thrilled at that because we have 90 members total in our riding. So you guys are doing amazing here, and I will be taking notes. But I am Judy Green. I am also co-president of the Green Party of Nova Scotia. I'm CEO of West Nova, former leadership candidate for the Green Party of Canada, and I'm now on the strategic team for Stop Ecocide Canada. And I would love to talk to you about any of those things. So you can always send me a message. But we have some amazing panelists here today. Jody Koberinski, SSHRC Doctoral Fellow, Faculty of the Environment, University of Waterloo. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. And that would be Cindy, my little dog, who's decided that she's going to announce the arrival of my husband. I apologize, but this is Zoom time, right? We're all getting used to these craziness. Jaya James is Executive Director of Hope House, a poverty relief charity in Guelph that uses the power of community to overcome poverty. Jamie Miller is President of Biomimicry Frontiers, an award-winning sustainability consultancy and strategic planning firm. He's a nature-based designer and an expert in biomimicry, biophilia, and ecological engineering. So thank you all panelists for joining us here tonight. I want to just do a quick little introduction of how I came upon the Doughnut economic model. I'm very much a systems-based thinker, and being a software engineer, and an object-oriented one, I see things visually. And I see large amounts of data and concepts visually. And so when I stumbled across the Doughnut economic model, it just struck me how very neatly many of our Green Party policies slip into each of the slots. And I'm just going to share my screen really quickly here to show you the image that many of you may have seen. This is the Doughnut economic model. And what I love about it is that it deals with having a social equity floor or foundation below which nobody should fall. And it has an ecological ceiling, which is the carrying capacity of our planet. And I absolutely love that what we know instinctively is that we should be living in between those two boundaries, as it were. And yet we know very clearly that we do not, that we are overshooting on issues of the climate crisis, ocean acidification, biodiversity loss, and many more. And we are very much in a shortfall, especially with the added pressures that COVID-19 has put on our society in terms of providing that social foundation. You know, the CERB and all of the patchwork of help that the government has put into place is, while it's been very appreciated, it's very leaky. It shows how badly the programs work that are focused on making or trying to help a certain select group of people. So there's these little boxes that they're constantly trying to put people in. People don't fit in boxes. And we need to be looking at overall fixing those issues, the basic human rights of food, water, housing, and the social equity issues, gender equality, political voice, peace and justice. You know, all of these fall into our core values for Greens. So it really looked to me like a very valid model to be modeling our Green Party policies and to perhaps be influencing our policies while moving forward. This has been really cool that this model has been in place since, I think it was 2012, and is being used in at least 80 countries around the world, including Amsterdam, which I believe one of our panelists will be discussing a little bit more. So this is what it should look like in a perfect world. But this is actually what we're seeing. And this is what the model looks like when things are out of balance. It shows where and to what degree we are overshooting those boundaries, or we have a shortfall in terms of providing for our citizens. And I have a strong belief that if you take care of the citizens of Canada, they'll take care of Canada. And I think we're failing miserably in that respect. So I fully expect to be using aspects of this model on the doorsteps during the next election, because I believe the image really helps to capture what we're talking about when we're talking about social equity and environmental sustainability in a way that will reach more people than just trying to find the right words for them on the doorstep. So that was really an eye-opener for me during the last federal election in 2019, and I was a candidate for West Nova, and had been reading bits and little bits here and there since that time. There is a really good, let's see if I can find it here. Of course, it's not in my buffer anymore for pasting. Now it's there. Okay, so this is a YouTube playlist of Doughnut Economic resources that I encourage people to copy and paste and go from there. So that's my little introduction to the Doughnut Economic model. I would really like to know from Jody, what makes the Doughnut model so exciting for you?
Hi, yeah, there's so many things that are really exciting about this model. I think one of the biggest pieces for me as a researcher is constantly bumping up against the roadblock of, but what is there beyond capitalism? I think many of us have bumped up against this very cynical view that we can't imagine a way of organizing ourselves outside of the current economic system. And this framing, this new framework of Doughnut Economics gives us a new way to talk about some very common issues that, you know, right now the solution is, oh, well, we'll have ecosystem services and we'll monetize, you know, these contributions that the natural world makes to the economy. And it's just commodifying further rather than saying, hey, maybe we could look at valuing the planet's functions and the other members of our ecosystem that we share space with in a very different manner. This model gives us sort of 4 lenses for planning. It gives us a social lens, an ecological lens, a global lens, and a local lens. And the process of that Kate Rayworth and the others at the Doughnut Econ Lab have put together over the last 4 years guides a city or a municipality through a process of arriving at what does it look like? What does a good life look like in the Guelph area? And, you know, how far are we as a region from meeting this vision of thriving as a way of organizing ourselves rather than some calculus for maximizing profit and trying to quantify the contribution that the ecosystem makes within that system. We can actually envision a whole new way of economy. And so in my research, I will look at food systems. I've been involved with the organic sector and with various food movements in Canada since the late 1980s. And we've reached an understanding that as long as we keep doing what we've been doing and commodify food, we're going to get the same results. And so there's this notion of a food commons or this idea of public food, but that won't fit in the current classical Chicago school of economics. But when you start talking about Doughnut economics, we can actually start to see a food commons and, you know, public food as being an access point for planning into this system in a way that allows us to build forward. And so we could start to envision having farmers that operate in the way that dentists, nurses, and doctors do on an insurance plan or on a public plan where we hire the farmer in the same way we hire the doctor to look after 200 families. And those sorts of thinking that becomes possible in this framework where it's not possible under the current system.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Jody. So what makes it a well-suited tool for becoming an instrumental tool for change? So what is so intriguing about this model?
Is that for me or for someone else?
It is for you, Jody.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think because we switched the narrative. Right now, we act as if the economy is a finite creature and we bend everything to fit it. But you cannot bend physics to fit an imagined hierarchy. And this system places at the center those things that we cannot change, and then asks us to adapt our economy and our society around that. And so, as you saw in the diagram that Jody put up, you know, there's a boundary beyond which, if we override the balance of ocean acidification, major systems stop working, and biological life cannot be supported. That is not negotiable because BlackRock wants to do some, you know, new development somewhere. We have to change what the development is in order to avoid those ocean acidification issues. And so this model recognizes, you know, if there's a certain amount of poverty, we won't be able to make the social decisions to act on climate, because we won't have the kind of peace and flow within community that we require to be able to act. That's not a negotiable piece, depending on what labor markets want or don't want. People need to eat or there's unrest. And so we begin to look at what's changeable and what's fixed in a very different way when we move into this model.
Excellent. Can we talk a little bit about the potential for scalability and maybe touch on the benefits of the Amsterdam, or what's happening in Amsterdam?
Absolutely. So
Jody?
folks can look online. Amsterdam, Portland, and Philadelphia are all cities that are actively working with Kate Rayworth's Doughnut Econ Lab. Each of those cities have had very different processes. Amsterdam was quite unique. I think at one point they had over 1,000 community members, social scientists and researchers supporting the development of what's called a city portrait. And so there's guided sessions, and they've come up with, you know, there's templates for doing this. A community doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. The group has created a process that can be adapted at the municipal level, working with community groups, hosting various meetings, and getting feedback from the community to define what is a good life in our city. And so in Amsterdam, you know, they thought about housing as a major issue, and that the way that they've been doing housing in Amsterdam is contributing to a large portion of the city's greenhouse gas emissions. I think it was something like 50% of their GHGs were attributable in some way, shape, or form to housing and housing construction. And so they set a goal of being carbon emission 100% circular city by 2050. And that includes with their building materials. And so now the city, having set that as a value for the whole city in their planning, can work backwards on the decisions they make. And there will be all kinds of housing developments that previously would have happened without this ordinance that no longer will be permitted to happen, because those style of building, or that approach to building, the old school approach to building, produces too many greenhouse gases. And so this becomes an economic opportunity in Amsterdam for folks to take leadership in greenhouse gas reduced building techniques in order to meet this ordinance that they'd like to see enacted through their own city portrait plan. I'm unclear where Amsterdam's at with formalizing the application of this process, if at this stage of the game it's a guidance document, or as this has been adopted within the official community plan. I know that certainly is the agenda in all 3 cities that I mentioned, but folks can definitely go take a quick look online and see through the DoughnutEconomics.org website what progress has been made.
I'm not sure if Jody dropped off, quite possibly the technology. I would like
I
to
just
bring.
re-admitted her. Sorry,
Oh,
Krista.
there you are.
She
I'm
dropped off
so
and I just
happy.
re-admitted her.
No,
So
super.
sorry. Rural internet.
No, it happens. Thank you, Judy. I'm going to get.
Okay. What I'd like to do now is Jody. Sorry, Jody, are you finished your response?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, awesome. We're going to move on, and I'm going to switch it around because I know that Jamie is having to leave us a little bit early. So I'm going to ask the questions to Jamie a little bit sooner than on our schedule. So I really want to paint a clear picture of how Guelph will be better off if all these things happen. So we want a little bit of detail and anecdotes. That would be awesome. Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about the ecological ceiling? What is biomimicry, and how can it help us live within the ecological ceiling of our planet?
Biomimicry, if you've never heard of the term, it's innovation that's inspired by nature. And the most classic example is Velcro, which was inspired by burrs that stuck to your pants. A Swiss engineer just copied the hooking mechanism to make Velcro. So biomimicry at the very basic level is copying nature's forms to make cool technologies. But as you dig deeper and you start to realize that nature's processes and nature's systems offer incredible solutions that are sustainable and that have been time tested for 3.8 billions of years, you realize that biomimicry is really about uncovering the genius of nature and learning how to apply that to our systems and our forms and our processes. How does it relate to the ecological ceiling? Is nature is brilliant at maintaining or striving for equilibrium. If we all left the city today, what nature would do is naturally take over that gradient that we've created. We've created a glaring contrast between us and nature will take over that gradient. That's why we're so annoyed with the dandelions that take over our manicured lawns, is because nature abhors gradients. And so when you think of it at an economic scale or in terms of economics, it's a really beautiful metaphor, because a forest ecology can teach you so much about how to create greater diversity, how to create abundance, how to maintain resilience. One example is if you look at a forest canopy, you don't see one tree that's 600 feet above the rest of them, perhaps emulating an economic model like capitalism, where we're told to grow without limits. A forest will maintain a beautiful canopy because there's this inherent understanding that when you have that canopy, you're actually creating a barrier to environmental pressures from coming in and messing in the undergrowth. So it's creating this resilient strategy by working together and working at a certain limit. I also know trees can only grow so high because they're pumping water up without electricity, and it's kind of the pressure is as far as it can go. But also, if you look at a forest, it naturally tends to highest diversity because that's the most effective way that it can dissipate gradients, and diversity creates resiliency. So there's some interesting contrasts when you look at forest ecology as an economic model. There's an interesting contrast between that and the way that we've been kind of exploring our own economic model. And the other thing as it relates to a ceiling is that nature grows within limits. It can create its own microclimates, yes, but it grows based on the amount of resources available, and hilariously enough, will create the resources to continued further growth and abundance. So there's no real hierarchy in nature. The hierarchy is really based on the availability of resources.
Great. Jamie, would you be able to, can you tell us a little bit about reimagining Guelph as a city that thrives in its natural habitat? And what would that look like? Can you give us some vivid examples of local changes that could happen?
Sure. I think it goes back to that point about the glaring contrast. So the biggest thing, the best way Guelph can thrive in its natural habitat is to stop fighting it. We've adopted a paradigm or a way of thinking that we need to separate ourselves from nature, or that we need to control nature. And we know that that's quite expensive to do in terms of energy inputs. It takes a lot of energy to fight those dandelions. And the greater our contrast becomes, the more expensive it becomes. So the first step to better integrating into nature is to integrate into nature and let some wild be, and to find ways to harmonically build within those systems. An example is ecological engineering, which is really about understanding that nature does a lot of engineering for us for free. And to actually integrate that into design. So a lot of the master planning that we do as our company is we leverage hidden assets. So we look at the, the swamps, or the wetlands, or we measure the CO2 sequestration from forests and trees, or we measure how much soil production or how much rain is dissipated through forest canopies, so that we can see economically what nature's doing for us for free. And recognizing, so ecological engineering is about recognizing that nature does those systems, but then trying to find ways to build those systems into our own. So making symbiotic designs. And that's, a wastewater garden is a great example. We've designed some of those where you treat wastewater through a living system, an eco machine, or, green walls. There's lots of cool examples of how you build nature back in, but the biggest thing is to stop fighting it and to find ways to live harmonically with it. Recognizing that there is some uncertainty in nature, but that can be exciting.
That's an awesome picture to paint. Thank you very much, Jamie. Appreciate that. As you're talking, I'm thinking so much about how our worldview will have to change, and how similar this Doughnut Economic worldview and the biomimicry does align with First Nations worldview. So I think that there's a lot of knowledge there that we can tap into as well. Thank you very much. I'm not sure how much longer you'll have to stay on with us, but I had a follow-up question for you, Jamie, about asking what would you say were the first steps for Guelph to get started in transitioning to a Doughnut economic model?
I mean, one project that we're working on in Guelph is as a part of the Our Food Future project, which is the Guelph circular food economy. We're looking at patch dynamics. So, I won't go too much into that. The point is, we're trying to create a more resilient food system, a circular food system. And something we're doing in our neighborhood, the Junction neighborhood, is finding ways to leverage backyard gardens. So, we're playing with an app where if you grew too many cherry tomatoes this summer, you could actually put them on this app and share them or sell them to your neighborhood. And so people could eat and people could grow food in their backyard gardens. And how that relates to nature is that nature's built on redundancies. It doesn't have that linear agricultural model where you take farm to grocery store to home to waste. So how can you create more circular economy at a local scale? Nature's always focusing on local attributes, local availability. So that's one thing. And I'm really exploring how we can do that, where we partner with people who need access to healthy food. So the next step in this project is we're starting to map out who grows what, because if we're all growing cherry tomatoes, that's a dumb economic system. If I'm really good and I have a great ecosystem for cherry tomatoes, I'll do that. Amy down the street, you grow the chickens. My compost will help your chickens. And all of a sudden we have a next level redundant agricultural system. And we're a bit smarter, and we're also in harmony because we're growing food that relates to the ecosystem that we're in. So, if I have a lot of sun, I'm going to grow this. If you have more shade, grow that. And we can work more intelligently and more collaboratively. So that's one project that's happening in Guelph, and we're piloting this with the city of Guelph, the Smart Cities office. And if it's something you're interested, I'd be happy to connect you to. And the last point I'll say is there's an Indigenous elder on my board. And she said to me when I told her what I did, she says, Jamie, we've been doing biomimicry for thousands of years. And so I'm not under the belief that this is a new idea. It's just new to me.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for tying that together, Jamie. That was wonderful. Excellent. So we're going to go on to Jaya now. And Jaya is going to talk to us a little bit about the making sure that all of the social needs are met for citizens in Guelph.
Hi, so as I was thinking a lot about this, I was trying to think very tangibly of what this would look like and how to describe it, because I think that's what we're really looking for. And so when we see the donut, we understand that the hole in the center is where people are falling through, and all of us have experienced that at some point in our life where we've kind of fallen through, and or we know people who are continuing to follow through. So if I was to imagine a system where we are actually operating on the donut, I think it could be boiled down really to one core piece. It would be a place where everyone belongs. And I had a friend of mine who was taking some coursework, worked with children primarily, and she was doing some research, and one of the classes they went to was talking about the difference of inclusion versus belonging for kids. But I found it a very powerful concept, the way the instructor shared it. And he said that the difference, between inclusion and belonging is this, that an inclusive system means everyone is welcome. A system where someone belongs is if they go missing, people notice and go looking for them. And I think this is really what we're trying to do with the Doughnut Economics, is that we're trying to create a system where no one's falling through, because if they or a creature or any type of creation or nature is starting to disappear, that we notice, we go looking for, and we try to bring them back onto the donut. And so I think that as we're going forward and trying to, if we want to really boil down very simply, I think what we're trying to do is create a place where everyone belongs, where everyone's contributions matter, where everyone is able to contribute, and there's a sense of respect. And so as I was kind of reflecting on that more, I was trying to think of a couple examples of how we've seen this happen within the city of Guelph or other communities. And I think a really tangible one that we had a few years ago was when there was the Syrian refugee crisis. And all of a sudden you saw all these different individuals rise up and say, you know what, I can do something, I can help. And so what did they do to help? They formed groups of people that would sponsor families. And what did those sponsorship groups do? Well, the sponsorship groups kind of formed a support system around the families when they arrived, demonstrating to them that they did belong within this community, helping them navigate systems, helping them to find housing, helping them to find jobs, helping them to develop social networks and connections. And all of this was done in many ways a very organic matter, because if you look across the world, Canada is one of the very few countries in the world that has a sponsorship system where you do not have to be related to the individual to actually sponsor and care for them. And so we saw the city of Guelph rise up very strongly, and we had more than 86 different families arrive, which means there was more than 86 different groups of people that took responsibility for at least a year to support a family with resettling and connecting into the community here in Guelph. And similarly, I believe that if we were to take that approach with all the individuals in our community that are falling through right now, that it would be a very powerful approach for people. Because when something happens, when you are struggling or have had something knock you down, and all of us can think of those scenarios, what makes the difference is how strong the community is around you. And if you have a strong community, you can overcome it. And it's why at Hope House we say the opposite of poverty is not wealth, but it's community. Completely stole that from Gabor Mate, so I don't want to take credit for it. But it really is this idea, going back to kind of Jody's comments earlier too as well, is that it's not about a financial only system. And I always like to point out to people is that human society existed well before we had an exchange of this, paper money or coins. We had ways of existing for thousands of years where we were able to function very well, had healthy, successful societies. This is a newer, okay, I can't find the word there, but this is a newer invention for us, this idea of grounding everything back to an economic dollar. And it takes away from so many things. And I think when we look at why people are falling through the center, it's because our valuing of certain things has gotten so high that all of a sudden some people have become worthless. And it's a devastating thing to say, but we see this all the time when we are walking down the street and you see individuals who aren't housed. And having worked in this community, there's been a major push recently to really work on improving the housing scenario. But we have been ignoring this over and over and over. We know what the solutions are, and we know that these are key, critical, important pieces, but we keep ignoring it. And so that to me is kind of when I look at and think, how would Guelph look different? I see a community where every single person belongs. And to kind of just finish that off, I think that the other piece about belonging is this concept from Japan, which I'm going to say wrong, so I apologize right now, this Ikaigi, and it's this idea that every individual has a purpose, and your purpose is very simple in how it's defined. It comes based on 4 factors. It is what the world needs, what you're good at, what you love, and what you can get paid for, and that those things need to be in balance with each other. And where all those things intersect is your purpose or your reason for being here. And I think a big part of belonging is knowing that you have a reason, there's something you're contributing, that if you were to disappear, the world would be less without you. And so that's what my kind of vision is when I see the Doughnut Economics.
That's awesome, Jaya. I absolutely love that vision. I would love to share that with you right there in Guelph. Wonderful. So we've been really focused more on the local vision or local lens for the Doughnut economic model. I'm going to bounce this back to Jody to talk a little bit more about the global lens.
Yeah. And so, you know, one of my teachers is Winona LeDuc, and she speaks very clearly to the idea that if we all just stopped and did the stuff exactly where we were, we protected the water where we live, if we cared for the soils and the places that we are, if we, as Jaya has said, if we noticed when one of us is missing and cared for that person's absence, and we're aware of each other in that way, at the local level, the global issues would absolutely take care of themselves. And this need to recognize that the major pushback on any of these sorts of transformations is, how does this handicap the Guelph region if we're the only ones following this new set of rules, right? So why should we make these changes if X is happening in China or Y is happening in Brazil? And there's a few reasons for ignoring that cynicism. And the main one is recognizing we in Canada are the last to the party in some regards. Everybody else, everywhere else, is either 3 inches underwater or is in their second or third 250-kilometer-an-hour cyclone, or is suffering from civil war induced by repeated drought. And we are amongst the last to really get the severity of the various things that are going on. And if we can stop and really take care of organizing and planning, what are the energy flows in and out of our communities, and make some committed changes about that, we'd be surprised to learn that we're actually not leading. We're that second wave of people that make a movement really happen. The leaders and the risk takers, they've been out there, they've been doing this work. Or they're the societies and the communities that we've overridden over the last 300 or 400 or 500 years. And so by acting on this very local scale to rethink how we plan at the municipal level, we begin to really actively change the narrative on how we do things at the provincial level, but we also begin to see where other people are already doing this elsewhere in the world, and the reality of what it means to do things locally and the impact that that has globally hits us in a big way, because it means we take full responsibility for Nestle, which is a global issue. It means we take full responsibility for supporting our various solar businesses that have popped up in the Guelph region in the past decade, and don't leave that to other forces. So it doesn't mean that we can just pretend that we're not part of a global system or that there aren't larger forces at play, but maybe it means that Guelph decides what kind of telecom reality it wants, and it starts to set up its own social networks for sharing information, because Guelph recognizes that there's some things that can't be left in the hands of capital in the way that we have up until now. So there's a lot of power, and you can see this in communities like Los Angeles, which over the last year had a people's budgeting process, and they had something like 20,000 citizens involved in a effort to write an alternative to the police budget. And that kind of grassroots action, you know, is the kind of action that in St. Louis got Cory Bush elected on a similar platform that's like looking after the foundations in the donut in a profoundly new way. And those things aren't happening because we sat around at some federal level and came up with a plan. It's because people at the local level said enough is enough. We can look after the pieces we can look after. We can take responsibility for our watershed, or we can take responsibility for the folks who aren't being met, whose housing needs are not being met, whose food needs are not being met by the existing system. And we actually change that narrative one person at a time when we involve our neighbors in that good work, because the work's not going to happen online, and it's not going to be led by provincial or federal governments. It's going to come at the level of community.
Awesome. Thank you, Jody. That's so inspiring. Yeah, I mean, it's empowering to know that we can take action at the local level and to affect this kind of radical change. So many times we feel so overwhelmed by the immensity of the challenges that are in front of us that it is very heartening to hear that there are ways that we can take first steps.
I'm going to add one more thing, and then I'm going to give up the mic.
Sure.
I had a number of my teachers remind me over the years that the work that is ours is to pick up is what we can manage to pick up with what's going on in our lives at the time. And this is an immense task, and it feels like we want to fix it all at once, but we don't know where on the trajectory of this long arc toward justice that society is on. Are we at the very beginning, or are we over the tipping point and we can't see? It's an intergenerational struggle, and it's going to take all of us doing what we can as we can in a sustaining way. And that might mean some of us are sprinting the whole lifetime, and good on those of us who can do that. But that isn't necessarily what I'm calling into when I suggest that that change is going to happen at the local level. It's like, as we can, as we're able, and as we're inspired to engage.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for that. Jamie, did you want to speak any further about, oh, sorry, no, Jaya, did you want to speak any further about what are the key areas that we need to focus on in Guelph to take those first steps?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it on just one key point, because it is the foundation of being able to do any other things. And it's no one's going to be surprised here when I say it. It's a housing first approach to everything that we do, and that we need to have adequate, affordable housing that meets people's needs for everyone across the entire spectrum. And until people have a place where they can sleep and belong, none of the other pieces can really kind of fall into place. So
that's excellent, Jaya. You know, and I think we've seen that, like with COVID-19, it's really illustrated the things that are broken in our society. And, you know, the lack of housing is a really critical one. Very basic fundamental needs that human beings have are not being met. And we really have had the spotlight shone on those issues. And it is so awesome to find a model like the Doughnut Economic model that provides solutions, and not just piecemeal solutions, but real solutions going back to what the real problem is and fixing it at that level. If you haven't been looking at chat, there is some great resources people are putting in the chat, as well as there's a new Doughnut, Guelph, a Doughnut City Facebook page. And I encourage you all to go and join that page, because this is where the discussion will continue. And I suspect this is where a little bit of magic will happen. So I'm really excited that you guys have all taken the step to do that. It's amazing. I just want to throw it out to our panelists if anyone wants to have any closing thoughts, and then we will start some question and answers.
Just really quickly, one of the pieces of my current scholarship is trying to adapt the donut for a land back reality. We do a lot of adopting European concepts, whether it's Extinction Rebellion or it's Doughnut Economics or these ideas that we think are really, fresh and new, but they're often repurposed approaches that Indigenous communities across the globe already take to some of these questions. And so in that Guelph Facebook chat, I'm going to commit to just probably once a month, just dropping a little update on how that work is going and what issues may be arising. How do we make sure that the donut isn't recolonizing and that it has space for Indigenous and Black-centered economies, which may be economies of gifting and reciprocity and not economies of money. And are we, how bold are we willing to be in this vision in centering some of these other perspectives? So I'll put in the chat that I think folks should look at Yellowhead Institute's paper. They did a paper last November 2019 on land back, kind of contextualizing that discussion for folks who are not up to speed.
That's awesome, Jody. Thank you so much for that. And I would just encourage everyone of our panelists to, if you have projects or things that people can join or ways of getting in touch with you, please put them in the chat so that this conversation can continue. And if there are any questions, please, for our panelists, please put them in the chat. I haven't noticed any. If there are some that I've missed, please let me know, and we will get those questions asked and answered.
Judy, Krista here. Somebody was asking about the app that Jamie was using. Is that possible, Jamie, for you to share that app?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share it in the chat.
Excellent. And it would be wonderful. There's so many resources being added here. If Vanessa or somebody could actually collect all of those from the chat, and perhaps that could be a great post in the new Facebook group.
Yes, I will take care of collecting those for you, Vanessa. I have those.
Awesome, Krista. Thank you so much. Working group, love it.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Judy and Jody and Jamie and Jaya and all the other Jays in our audience tonight.
It's a J
it just
night.
so happens it's a J night around the Doughnut Economics. I really want to say thank you to the panel and all the work that went into actually preparing for this. And we have someone quite quietly behind the scenes who has pulled a lot of this together. And that is our communications for the CA, and that's Vanessa Chris. So Vanessa, I know you like to stay behind, but you had a vision for this. And I think you picked an extraordinary panel who was able to articulate exactly why you felt so excited about this. And on that, I would like to make sure that you redeem your donut coupon. And when you do, you think about this. Be well, everybody.